welcome to this week's episode of ClueCon Weekly. Joining us this week is Kathryn, Grayson, Nanz, a senior developer advocate at Progress, an expert in UI, UX, and all things front end. Thank you for joining us today, Kathryn.
Thank you so much for having me.
Would you like to start with a quick introduction about yourself and your company?
Yeah, so as you started me off wonderfully, my name is Kathryn Grayson Nanz. I'm a senior developer advocate at Progress, and I work specifically in a part of the company that makes Kendo component libraries. So really super focused on creating specific components. I happen to be the developer advocate for the React components and for our design features, things like our Figma kits and our theming software. But I work with tons of great other people in the DevRel team that focus on other aspects of that product, on our components for other frameworks and other languages. And it's a great experience. To me, component libraries are like that perfect intersection of design and development, where I get to focus a lot on the user interface and on the user experience, but also pull in some of the technical knowledge. I feel very lucky to have landed where I have.
That's very good. Yeah, as I'm an engineer by training, and I really come from that background of programming, and I've always been terrible at UI UX. To be honest, like I have stories about how I delivered the project once, and it worked great, but also it wasn't the best looking thing. But I have spent like 3 days just on the UI, and then the guy just goes and says, "Well, I understand the UI is not final, so it's still okay," and just a single tear. I spent a week in that and it didn't work out. And I feel a lot of the community, especially the open source community, shares the kind of problem. So, since you're an expert in the field, could you help us try to understand what are the big mistakes we should avoid? I'm releasing an open source library. Very often, these are UI components like a dashboard or a control panel, whatever. So, what do you think are the worst things you can do?
Ooh, that's such a good question. The worst things you can do. I think one of the big places I always start with is accessibility, right? And so a lot of times for us when we're making UI components, we see that in color and in font size and in kind of font selection, right? So we'll see these components where the color contrast is really low. The difference between the text color and the background color is not different enough. That makes them really hard to read. Or where text is really, really small, which can also be a real challenge. So just kind of immediately right out of the box, visually, before you've even started to interact with it or anything, I think those are probably the big ones.
Probably agree with that. There is one thing I wanted to ask you specifically when Chelsea sent me the bio for the meeting. I thought it was a very. So what is the? I always have a problem with. I don't even know if it's the right name. Discoverability of features in the UI. Like we have, SignalWire, we have a capable UI UX team, but that always comes up sometimes that people sign up. You got to the dashboard. There's like 100 things you can do because we have a large platform that has a lot of features, and we end up, even if there's very good work going on, and it's always going on, you always end up in a meeting with someone as an SA. So I meet customers and I ask, well, how it's going? Well, we never got this thing done because I don't think you have the feature. And well, you know what? We had that for 2 years. I don't know how you didn't find it. So how do you help people learn where things are, which is a real problem?
It is a real problem. That's such a good question. There are kind of a couple things you can do here. One option when you have that many features, right? Which it sounds like is your situation. If you ask a couple questions when a new user is onboarding, you can help to kind of tailor the user experience by narrowing down what gets shown to them on their immediate dashboard. So like if I think actually Figma has some really good stuff around this. When you come in, they kind of say, are you a designer? Are you a developer? Are you a product manager? And then they'll kind of tailor your onboarding experience to highlight, like if you're a developer here, you'll be really interested in our like design to code tools and our dev mode and our inspect features. Oh, if you're a designer, you'll be really interested in these kinds of more, traditional UI design interface tools. And they can kind of help point you in the right direction and highlight the things that will be most relevant. You could also take the approach of just narrowing down what gets shown on a dashboard, right? Say like, oh, well, if you're, let's use the designer developer thing. I know that's probably not relevant to you specifically, but say, oh, if you're a designer, then we'll only show you the design tools and you can still access the development tools. You'll just have to maybe go through a menu. Maybe that's a couple clicks back rather than hitting you with kind of every available feature all at once.
That would
Um,
be that's a really good point. So in SigmaWire's world, that will be so we have our services mainly involve either voice, messaging, or video. And
mm,
I have to say, customers mostly use one of them. So we have very large messaging customers who
mm,
don't even know we have video and have
right.
probably never even tried voice. But there's a lot on the dashboard. So you're probably right. There's a way like specializing your users along the line of the biggest usage they do is really good
Yeah.
idea. Well,
There's
we'll try.
also, to jump off that, there's also a concept in UX called safe exploration. The idea being that, like, as much as we present people with these tutorials or these like guided onboarding flows, a lot of people will be like, whatever, skip, 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 I'm busy. They won't look at the things or read the docs in the way that we hope that they will. So, to kind of accommodate that part of human nature, basically, we can try to create an interface that feels low stakes, right? Where, like, if you click something, you can unclick it. If you try something, you can undo it. If you open a menu and it's not where you meant to be, it's really easy to back out and find your way back to where you were before. And it kind of encourages this culture of like, it's okay to click around and try stuff and like open this and change that setting and change this preference. And you're not going to find yourself in this situation where you can't revert or get back or you've, accidentally made some kind of huge purchase or something. That it feels safe to click around and learn by doing. And a lot of times when we don't have that, when it feels high stakes for people to, they do something and then they can't figure out how to back their way out, then they get really stuck and they're afraid to click things and they're afraid to explore and they do end up missing whole swaths of a product or application. So the more we can do to make it feel easy and safe to click around and have fun. Um,
That's a very good point. And this has come up in actual calls with customers where they will say, again, something like, okay, we're trying to do this, but I don't know how to do it. And I said, well, it's on the dashboard. Here it is. But we didn't want to save because if we click the save button,
right.
it wasn't clear what will happen. And so they didn't actually go through with it and they didn't try it. So there's maybe, so what would we advise? Maybe adding some visual clues like an undo button or so
Yeah.
people know that you can try it if you like.
Yeah, I think visual clues make a lot of sense for navigation, things like breadcrumbs, right? That will show you kind of the path that you took and you can easily step back to easier, earlier places in that flow. And kind of like you said, right? If they say, we're not sure what would happen, that generally implies that you have like a description or a copy kind of problem. That, right? If you have a button that says, for example, let's go, what does that mean? Where are we going? What's happening next, right? The more we
Let's
can
go on an
tailor.
adventure.
Yeah.
I didn't sign up for that.
Right. But yeah, there's a lot of hesitancy where it's like, oh, and does save mean save forever? Or does save mean update my user preferences?
Yeah.
Or does save mean, download a file? So the more we can be as explicit and as descriptive as possible. And that might even mean we just add a line of copy that's like, hey, when you click this button, you'll be taken to the settings page. When you click download, you'll have a copy in your local files and there'll be one on your dashboard. And I
Yeah.
know we don't want to clutter too much, but as if it really needs it, it's better to have that line of copy than
I'm honestly a fan of as much explanatory text as you can, even if it's we've taken so the industry has taken this direction of everything being minimal. Like what's on a page in a single line of text and an icon. If you're lucky, you understand what it is. It might not
yes.
come from the same culture, and there's cultures where a thumb up means a completely different thing. than it does for Europeans and Americans. So it's really hard to. Well, let me
Icons
say,
without labels is one of my biggest pet peeves. That
yeah,
drives me bonkers.
yeah, no labels and no titles. You mouse over and nothing happens.
You just guess, just see.
Just tell me what's gonna happen because I don't know. Maybe I mean maybe I'm in the billing page of an account and there's this says $500 somewhere on the page and yeah, so
Yeah, I think there's often this like misunderstanding of the idea of minimalism from a design perspective, right? Where a lot of times when developers or like, lay people, non-designers are thinking about minimalism, they're thinking put as few things on the page as possible. But when designers are talking about minimalism, often it means everything that's on the page has a purpose. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's nothing on the page, that there's only 2 items on the page. Even if there's 20 items on the page, each item is doing something to further the user's goal. It has a reason for being there. It's not just aesthetic, or it's not because some marketer felt like we really needed to put it on the homepage. It is doing a thing that is helping the user. If we can justify the existence of each item on a page, even just that has done a lot in terms of improving our interface.
for sure. Well, let me slice this slightly different angle.
Yeah.
Uh, let's say beginner versus experienced users or technical versus non-technical users. Let me put this in context. SignalR is a telephony platform, so we have some screens that have to have very technical questions like the types of codecs, so the encryption, etc., you're using to set up a call, and those are all 5-letter acronyms like this business is full of that
Yeah.
don't make much sense to non-technical people. Uh, and they end up on that screen, and again, it's the usual situation of I don't know what's
They
happening
get
here.
scared. Yeah.
How do you help beginners navigate, but let advanced people do whatever they needed to do in the first place without hiding things too much? That's always been a hard balance to strike.
Yeah. I think one of the things you said really stood out to me when you were talking about like all these acronyms or like this kind of technical jargon. I think especially when we're living in that world, we become really blind to it. Like, oh, of course we know what this means because we've been we've been looking at it every day for the last 3 years. We don't it doesn't feel technical to us anymore, but often it does feel more technical. Even more experienced users just might not be familiar with something. The more we can spell things out, right, or just like parentheses, this is what that means. That can make things feel really easy. I think it's also okay to have, I think actually places like Squarespace do a really good job of this, where there are sections that are meant for if you've hired a developer who's building you a custom theme. Sometimes they'll have some text that's like, maybe don't mess with this if you're not familiar with CSS, or there's ways you can go in and reroute your domain names and hook up all sorts of other stuff. But if you're just there to build a WYSIWYG website and you're not a developer, sometimes they'll have a little alert, a little piece of copy that's like, hey, maybe this isn't where you're meant to be, friend. And it can be hard to strike that tone without feeling
I agree
patronizing,
with
but I do think it's important. Yeah.
I agree with that because the problem with the telephony aspect of it is that if you change those settings, your
Mhm.
phone calls might stop working.
Yeah.
It's effectively, just to put it in non-technical perspective, it's a sort of a sub language the devices are speaking to each other. So if you
Yeah.
turn off language the device is speaking, it doesn't work anymore. You literally cannot take phone calls anymore. And maybe you don't know what happened there, and it turns into a nightmare of debugging, etc. So I think a warning text sometimes needs to be there.
Yeah.
Plus maybe a little advanced box. I don't know, something like
One, a confirmation dialogue actually can go wonders here. You ever, I'm trying to
that.
think
Do
of a
you
good
know what you're
example.
doing?
Well, or places, I think Notion does this. I'm trying to remember. There are places where if you delete a page or you delete a setting, it'll pop up a window. It will make you type the name of the thing you're deleting, right? Like,
Oh yeah.
um, Mongo does this for databases, right? So if you're like, I want to delete this whole collection, they'll be like, cool, type the collection name, hit confirm. It'll tell you if you delete this, you cannot retrieve it. It will make you type the name of the thing you're deleting and manually hit the delete key. So it's intentionally adding some friction, which we don't usually think about that, right? We think about like, oh, we want everything to be frictionless and smooth and fast. But sometimes when we do intentionally add friction in places, it can pull the user out of their kind of flow automatic state and make them think about it a little harder. Be like, oh, it's asking me, am I sure? Am I
Mhm.
really sure? And it's not just saying yes or no, it's making me do something like, type out a specific word in order to pull me out of that, like, yeah, click, click, click kind of state that I was
Maybe
in.
I shouldn't have clicked that checkbox.
Yeah. It wants you to think twice, and that can be really good sometimes.
That's a very okay. So, since I have you here, which is an invaluable resource, because this show is for people of all trades, but we gravitate towards engineering types who are
Totally.
not as talkative or as good at speaking as you are. First of all, then we are very technical and know about. We really like our four-letter acronyms.
Oh, yeah.
So, first of all, let me preface saying I think there's a professional is needed to do UI UX at the proper level that's needed. But
Yep.
there's also many smaller projects who have one person
Oh,
or
100%. Yeah.
people working on it. And if you grow, you'll have to start interfacing with professionals anyways. Like, hey, we hired the UI expert. How do we explain her how we want the UI to look at it? Like, so the question is, how
Mm.
does an engineer get started understanding this UI UX experience that you're trying to at least I would say again, not replace. It's not something you can learn and start doing, but it's certainly something you can at least understand and start
Yeah,
speaking of language of. Where would you
absolutely.
start?
Absolutely. And to follow up on that, yeah, like I am of the firm believer that design is a skill. It's a thing that can be learned. It's not an innate talent. Anyone who is interested in becoming a better designer can do so. I believe the same thing is true of programming, for whatever that's worth. If you're interested in it, it's completely learnable. Some people will be a natural at it, some people won't. That's okay. It's all just stuff. And if you're interested enough in learning it, you totally can. Um, that being said, at the risk of promoting my own work a little bit, I did actually write a book, an ebook that's
Oh,
available for free on exactly this topic. It's called Foundations of Design for Developers. Um, and my goal with that book was not necessarily to turn you into a UX professional or to help you get a design job, but to just understand the basics and ideally improve that kind of communication within a team and help you kind of find the words to describe what you are looking for, and to understand when it's being presented to you what things are important and are should be prioritized and help ease the pain of that kind of design to development handoff a little bit. Uh,
feels like that's a very. I mean, first of all, I'm actually going to go read through your book like this evening. I desperately need that kind of help at all times. I always say that's always been a weakness in my professional life. I'm a good engineer. I understand business very well. I have also
yeah.
have a background in business that I can't draw UI to save my life. Like even just if I put three buttons on a page, two of them are going to be in the wrong place. That's guaranteed. It's just how it is. I mean, it's maybe something we do with spatial awareness and whatever. It's completely fine. But I feel like a book is going to be a great starting point because a lot of people in the industry do learn from books more than anything else. I'm not a media
Yeah.
person, so the book is going to be really really interesting. And what else? So you mentioned the handoff from designers to engineers. That's
Yep.
also a very very interesting topic. Uh, how well? Let's go the other way. How will you advise designers
Mm.
to what will you advise designers to do to be able to hand off efficiently to engineers? Because I've seen that be a
Yeah.
very harsh friction point many times. Like we don't know how to do this. It doesn't look like it used to. Why do we have to do it?
Yeah.
Sometimes the question is why do we have to do it, which is dumb. You're because it's your job, but
Right.
because it's your job is the worst way to motivate someone, in my opinion.
Yep.
Because so how does a designer make sure that engineers understand what she's trying to convey?
I think the trick actually moving both ways, right? So this applies to designers as much as it applies to developers, is to learn enough about the tools that the other side is using. That doesn't mean you have to be proficient in using them. It just means you need to understand the language a little bit. So for designers, a lot of times what I recommend is getting familiar with, is the development team using a component library? If they are, then they might be restricted to the capabilities of those particular components. And if you create a component that does something that those components don't, you'll have that friction in the handoff, right? Similarly, some of the development basics, right? Especially around CSS, things like how a responsive page is going to reorder. Getting, again, you don't have to be able to sit down and code something using Flexbox, but learn kind of the basic, if I put enough things here, it'll wrap. So I can plan when I'm laying things out, this piece will wrap to the next line. To things like the CSS box model, right? Like when you get familiar with those kind of fundamentals, it helps because you already kind of know, you can plan ahead when you are designing and you can know, okay, I'm already lining up with the restrictions that I know are going to be over here on the other side. And I say the same thing moving the other way to developers. I'm like, learn just a little bit about color systems and color theory and about, visual hierarchy and, balance on the page, because those are the things your designer was thinking about when they laid out the page. That's what they're going to be looking for, right? And I think it's pretty common. I hear less people talk about pixel perfect design these days, but every now and again, you still come across somebody who's really attached to exactly how it looked in a mock-up in Photoshop or something, God forbid. And they're not thinking in terms of a page that's going to be dynamic, that's going to rearrange itself, that's going to respond to user input. So everyone, I think, especially certainly designers and developers, but also I would say more the people, stakeholders, people who are signing off. Sometimes as designers and developers, part of our job is education, client education, stakeholder education, and letting them know that pixel perfect design is not possible or even a goal that we should be working towards, honestly.
I think this pixel perfect sort of went away when most designers started actually programming. So most people know at least CSS and HTML and can bring a pure, let's say, pure design. So something you drew up using a drawing app into at least HTML, CSS. That point, you realize that pixel perfect is not really even not only not possible, but it's not the right media. This is not a printed page where it has to be 1.5 inches from
yeah.
not even going to work. So it is. I think that's a good thing. I personally, I hope I don't get fired for this, but it only happens with executives generally. Not ours, other executives.
Yeah, right. It's that kind of for people that haven't been in the industry and doing the individual contributor work in the last 5 to 10 years, things have changed a bunch. Like you said, right? And design software has changed a bunch, right? Where you don't get given those kind of print-based templates anymore.
The other couple are not as strict or as precise as I remember. I'm old enough, sadly, to remember things like Dreamweaver.
Oh, me too.
Oh, that thing was horrible. It would just generate a page that was 20 kilobytes of inline styles. Because it had to be exactly like that. So there would never, and half of it will be position absolute in CSS. So the page made the page a little bit smaller. Everything will go off screen, go everywhere.
As long as you didn't touch anything at all, it was fine.
Don't do anything. You could not. I remember I couldn't edit those files by hand, even if
no, they're barely human readable. Are you kidding?
So that's changed a lot, and I think the benefit, and I think a lot of merit for that goes to CSS frameworks like Bootstrap, Tailwind. You still have to do a lot of work to not make your app look like any other app in the world. So it's still not easy, but it's helped a lot to understand that you can build a design without being too strict. That's really
100%.
Well, Bootstrap or Tailwind?
Ooh. Or what? Sorry.
for engineers, pro bootstrap, I would say.
Yeah, probably. I have here's the part where I have to admit, I'm one of those obnoxious people that loves to write CSS. Um, I I love to write it myself. I love a preprocessor like Sass to get those like mix-ins and all the like variables are now in vanilla CSS, but there's still just a little bit that Sass offers you. I'm not a CSS framework person myself, but I understand their value. So I'm not here to dunk on them, but also I don't feel like I can give you a good. I
Yeah.
don't have a strong opinion personally. It's just not how I like to code.
So as an aside, you're mainly a React developer, right?
Yeah.
So this is a question that's come up. This is a discussion that's come up mainly. It's come up on the show a few times, mainly with backend developers, etc. Do you always reach for React, or is there a minimum complexity below which you don't need that level of control? That's
Yeah, I don't always reach for anything. Um, I'm I think part of that, right, is that I don't have a development background. I have a design background. I'm self-taught and I moved over here and I've bopped around and I've written things in vanilla JavaScript and I worked writing Angular for a few years and then I hopped back and wrote React for a few more years and now I'm doing DevRel stuff. I'm not attached to any particular set of tools. I do like React. I like the way I like their focus on design and their kind of one-to-one parity with like what you're writing being what you see in the interface. To me, that makes a lot of sense to my brain. When you're reading JSX, to me, it's like, I can imagine, I can see exactly how this is going to be in a way that just works personally. I like it. But yeah, no, several years ago, I was offered a job writing Angular, and I said, "Yeah, sounds good." and I broke up with React for a little bit and jumped over and wrote Angular. So no, I think rather than and like there is benefit in reaching for tools that you know and are familiar with, and I don't want to dismiss that. But also, I think more than being a React developer or a whatever developer, um, I view myself as a problem solver. And if I'm presented with a specific problem, I want to reach for the tools that are going to be most suited to that specifically. And that may or may not be a specific language or framework.
and I think you're totally right because I'm right this second. I thought I'm guilty of that on the back end a few times. Like I am a very experienced Ruby and Rails developer.
Mm.
Been doing that since forever, version 0 point something. And I tend to build everything in a Rails app. Well, sometimes it's maybe 80% of it is overkill, but it just takes a shorter time for me. So it's just a
Yeah.
customer demo that the customer that needs to see. Then it's how I will do it. So you're right. It's just my question of do you always use React is not framed correctly because well, everybody has their own rule set, and
Yeah.
it is what it is. Well, to wrap it up, will you be speaking at any conferences anytime soon, or
Yeah,
any engagements? Oh, cool.
I will.
Where?
I, I will be in person at KCDC, Kansas City Developers Conference. I believe actually that will be happening right as this is airing. That's the June 26th to 28th. So hopefully I'll see you folks there. I will also be later on at DevUp in St. Louis and at React Summit US in New York in November. So I'll be around.
Thanks a lot. And well, then go meet Kathryn, go hear her speech. I think it's going to be a great experience. I know I'm going to check out your book like right after the recording because I need that, and it's always a great read to start learning how to interface. Like again, I work in maybe in a different side of the world right now, but we always end up having to relay what a customer said about something to the build team. So having language is really important. So it's going to help me too. So it's going to help me and it's going to help everybody in the open source industry for sure. Well, Kathryn, Grayson, Nanz from Progress joined us today. Thank you for joining us, Kathryn.
Thank you again. This was fun.
Oh, I hope it was. Thank you. And for the rest of the people, I'll see you next week. Goodbye.